Kyrie Irving, because of the uncertainty of his basketball future, Nike unlikely to extend Kyrie Irving's signature shoe deal beyond next season. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. Obviously, Kobe and the Mamba, and now they had the Mambasita shoes, which are the Kobe's kind of sort of redesigned, them being back in the fold. Those were, I believe, the most popular Nikes in the basketball world. Those were kind of replaced by the Kyries. But this is one of those cause and effect sort of deals. I don't think it has to do with the vaccine or with the flat earth thing. I think this is, you go back to last offseason when the new Kyries were released, and he, on social media, called them trash. Like, I don't know what Nike's left to do. I was like, look, we sell a ton of your shoes. You make a ton of money on it. And this is how however it was released and done, I'm sure it's by the book in terms of their agreement. But that's a rough week for Kyrie Irving. When you're watching teams play that I'm sure you think you're better than, when you've had your general manager come out and say, are you committed to him long term? Well, we haven't discussed that, but we want guys that are committed, available, play for each other. Like, there's a lot of and now you might lose your Nike deal. It's not a good week. Mark Medina has covered the NBA for years. He works for NBA Media. He's our Fox Sports Radio playoff reporter. What's your sense of what happened to James Harden in the second half last night?
James Harden showed what he normally has been in the playoffs in the last few years. He disappeared, and it was really I don't want to say that was surprising, but when you looked at the first half, I thought James Harden played really well. He made shots, he was passing the ball, and in the second half, he looked completely disengaged. And, his post-game comments saying that, I was involved in the offense, I just wasn't getting the ball back. I think that's a poor cop-out and excuse. Sure, he might be passing the ball and others are shooting, but he wasn't aggressive at all, and I think hence Joel Embiid's pretty candid comments afterwards saying that this isn't the Houston Rockets version of James Harden, and we'll see if Daryl Morey comes to accept that as well.
Why do you think Doc was so defensive?
Well, I think that's just how Doc Rivers is as a personality. A lot of times when he's asked about coaching decisions, he gets defensive about it. I mean, look, I don't think there's any debate. DeAndre Jordan earlier in the playoffs was not a good matchup to have in the rotation, and he got defensive over that. So I think part of his fiery personality, I don't know to what extent that means his coaching with the Sixers is in jeopardy. But look, this is a team that was constructed to win a championship, and when they traded Ben Simmons, part of the reason why Daryl Morey was so adamant on holding out for a deal was he wanted to make a deal that he thought would help them win a championship. So he reunited with James Harden. I put more blame on James Harden than Doc Rivers, but there's a lot of things that Daryl Morey will have to unpack this offseason when you're looking at the coaching and James Harden, the rest of the roster. A lot of things to do starting today.
Likelihood that he's in Philadelphia next year?
James Harden?
No, Doc Rivers.
Yeah, I'd say it's hard to say. I guess he will stay. I think that, when they take a step back, they'll look at more of the roster issues than the coaching issues. But, I think everything's on the table, obviously, because of what happened with the Sixers playoff exit. But I'm also curious if the Lakers are a factor here. They've been, I think very deliberative with their coaching search, partly to see how the dominoes would fall in the NBA playoffs. And I wouldn't be surprised that they start, knocking on the Sixers' door and seeing if they're okay with interviewing Doc, because they see him as, an accomplished coach. He's obviously had championship experience managing personalities, knows the LA landscape. So it might not just be his departure being a result of a coaching dissatisfaction from the Sixers. He might have some interest elsewhere.
Let's get Mark Medina for NBA Media joining us. I'm Doug Gottlieb in for Colin. This is The Herd. Dallas behind, an otherworldly performance from Luka survives, forces a Game 7. And, it's interesting. Here's a Phoenix team who last year, there was the back down from LeBron and Andre Drummond laughing at Jay Crowder on the bench and imitating LeBron. And that seemed to be the moment, combined with Anthony Davis getting hurt, that series turned, right? And it's one of those, like, be careful who you talk trash to. Between Chris Paul and Devin Booker coming at Luka Doncic, like it kind of feels like they rattled the wrong guy's cage a bit. I know that Luka's competitive no matter what, but that's a guy who seems to play better when you talk trash to him. What are your thoughts on watching Luka and his ability to, not single-handedly, but feeling like single-handedly he's carrying this team?
Yeah, it's scary because it just feels like as much as Luka Doncic has been an accomplished player all year and all season, and clearly he's a generational talent, there's this feeling that he's just scratching the surface. As dominant as he is, I think the new added wrinkle this season, and in particular against the Suns, is there's finally been more reliable teammates around him. I mean, when you're looking at Spencer Dinwiddie and Reggie Bullock, for example, they had some poor performances earlier in the postseason, but they've been able to rally and play a lot better. And I think that also Luka has shown a lot more trust in his teammates than he did when Kristaps Porzingis was on the floor. Now, I think in Luka's case, I don't fault him for playing the way he does. I think that he is a complete player, but I think that there has to be some level of empowerment to kind of push guys and bring the best out of them. And hence, I don't know if this is a championship caliber roster, but it's certainly a roster that's much better than last year, and a roster that can legitimately eliminate the Suns in a Game 7 on Sunday. But the Suns have low-hanging fruit here. I mean, Chris Paul has not been Chris Paul at all. And I think in previous seasons, a lot of that had to do with, hey, his body's breaking down. And even at 37 years old, that hasn't been a case. But he's just committing really carelessly reckless turnovers. And that's something that's very uncharacteristic of him. He might have a game here or there that happens and he immediately bounces back. But over the last 4 games, he's averaged 4.5 turnovers. Like, that is mind-boggling to say the least. So I'd like to think that Chris course corrects that in Game 7, but at the same time, I thought he would have course corrected that earlier in this playoff series.
Doug Gottlieb in for Colin. This is The Herd. Okay, let's get to some of the discussion about some of the other teams. Sean Marks, without calling out Kyrie Irving, boy, it sure felt like he called out Kyrie Irving. When asked about how committed long-term they were to Kyrie, he didn't answer in terms of yes or no. But then he said, look, and he's, of course, blanketed with everybody. We want guys that are available. Well, that's not Kyrie, right? We want guys that play for each other. Kyrie's not seen as that guy. It feels like he wants to get back to the culture of what they had before they had Kyrie, before they had Kevin Durant. Is that your read into it?
That's my read into it 100%. And I think you made a good point earlier about how, Sean Marks tried to lump Kyrie and everyone together. And maybe technically that's true, but he was asked specifically about Kyrie Irving. And even if, he can hide behind technicalities of, we haven't had in-depth discussions about this, he could send the GM code and just say very simply, we'd love to have Kyrie Irving in a uniform long term. And he didn't say that for a reason. I think the interesting paradox with this is I think that the Nets want to get out of the culture that's partly been to blame with Kyrie Irving, with just his lack of accountability, not being always available, whether it's last season because of the vaccine mandate or even the previous season when he would just take personal time off without any forewarning. But, they don't want to alienate Kevin Durant. And Kevin Durant, as of now, feels very strongly about wanting to be with Kyrie Irving. So if I connect all these dots here, and that I have to stress I'm just connecting these dots, but I want to be surprised that there is no extension agreed upon, and then that next season is just about saying, okay, let's see if you can course correct, change behavior, lead the Nets past the first round, and be in the championship picture. And if not, then we start making changes. But this Nets team has been wildly unpredictable the last year. That I embrace the unpredictability ahead.
Speaking of unpredictability, you got the Lakers and all of the conflicting alliances, right? Like you got Jeannie Buss and Kurt Rambis, and then you have Pelinka, you have Clutch Sports, now Phil Jackson coming back into the mix. Like, who's really making any decisions, and what do they want to do?
Yeah, that's the thing that's really tough about the Lakers, this feeling that there always seems to be so many cooks in the kitchen. Now, Rob Pelinka, after his exit meetings, made it clear he's the one that's making the final decision. So whether you want to praise him for a move or criticize him for a move he did or did not make, he took some accountability there. I think that was step one, because during the season, there would be a lot of, narratives perpetuated that it was Clutch Sports pulling the strings and the Lakers are just simply listening to them. And look, I'm not trying to absolve their involvement in any way. Obviously, LeBron James has had a heavy role in any team he plays as far as who plays with him on that respective team. But, the Lakers historically have sometimes listened to LeBron James, i.e. getting Anthony Davis, i.e. getting Russell Westbrook, and sometimes they haven't listened to him, i.e. not hiring Ty Lue as the head coach, i.e. not making a deal during last season's trade deadline. So I think moving forward, there's going to be an emphasis of them taking ownership, but that puts together a whole other can of worms, because even if Rob Pelinka is saying he's the last one making the final decision, we don't know exactly what's the influence. We know that Phil Jackson and Magic Johnson are, informal advisors, and Kurt Rambis obviously has a say in basketball matters, as well as Joey and Jesse Buss, but we don't know where each person stands on certain decisions and how that influences what Rob does. I don't expect full clarity on those questions because the Lakers haven't necessarily been forthcoming with those things, but even in a general sense, there seems to be a lack of clarity on just what their basketball philosophy is beyond, hey, we have LeBron James and that gives us a chance to win a title.
Do they hold on to Russ because they want to or because they have to?
I think if they hold on to Russ, it's because they have to, because there's no market for him really because of his poor season. There might be some wishful thinking within the organization that with a new head coach with more than 21 games played with LeBron James and Anthony Davis like last season, that things will get better. But if I had to make an educated guess, if Russell Westbrook is still in a Lakers uniform next season, that's a big if. I think it's more out of reluctance than any want to have him. But I'm on record, and I still think so, that we're not going to see Russ in a Laker uniform, even if they're clinging to the idea that injuries and a new role, contributed much more significantly to his, undoing last season. I think that they're also well aware that a lot of these issues had to do with just Russ himself and his both inability and refusal to adapt his role. And I don't see that changing. That's just who Russ is. So I think that they will, whether it's negotiate a buyout or just move the goalposts and trade him for a handful of role players that can fill some positional needs, that's the route they're going to take. But again, Lakers are unpredictable, and we don't know which voices and influences will ultimately prevail with that decision or really any major decision they have to face this offseason.
Yeah, it's fascinating. People, give Russ the ball. That's what he's always done, but he can't shoot, and there's two other guys on that team you'd rather have with the basketball, and then he's just kind of in the way. So and that's not even starting with the defensive end where he wasn't engaged and has always been wildly overrated. So that one's going to be fascinating. How much concern is there in Golden State? It's one thing to lose when a team's up against the wall, but they don't have Ja. They didn't play well at home going back to Game 4, and then Game 5 they get eviscerated. They get run out of Memphis. How much concern is there?
I don't think there's too much concern now. Mike Brown, the acting head coach, was saying he has 100% faith in his team. The Warriors players seemed pretty calm and collected after the Game 5 loss. That's not to say they're going to just brush this loss off. They're well aware of the demons that have followed them even through the dynasty years of squandering that 3-1 series lead to Cleveland in the 2016 NBA Finals. But I think the Warriors are going to close this one out in Game 6. They've been 5-0 at home at Chase Center so far in the playoffs. Historically, they've done well in elimination games during this dynasty year. And, John Morant's not going to be on the team again. I know that the Grizzlies obviously won Game 5 without him. They went 20-5 without Ja during the regular season. But I think ultimately the Warriors, championship experience is going to prevail in a game like this where they can still lean on guys like Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. But, they have to put in the work. They got to win the rebounding battle, be much more disciplined with the ball, and they have to get Jordan Poole going. He's been kind of this really feel-good story for the Warriors during the playoffs. But in the last 2 games, he's been disappearing with more attention on him. But I think that they're going to course-correct this so that they can not worry about a Game 7 in Memphis on Sunday.
Mark, great stuff. Really appreciate you joining us. The Hoops has been good, but your reporting's been even better. Thank you so much for joining us on Fox Sports Radio.